Commander Vexthala checked her weapon readings for the third time in 10 minutes. The sleek silver device hummed quietly against her blue-scaled hip, its energy cells full and ready. Around her, the other 5 members of the Zephyrian Guard performed their own equipment checks with the same nervous precision. Sensors confirmed the target planet ahead, reported Krikstal, their navigation specialist. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as data streams flowed across his retinal displays. Classification, Deathworld. Threat level, extreme. Vexthala nodded grimly. In her 2 decades of military service, she had never been assigned to observe a Deathworld species. Most civilizations that evolved on such hostile planets died out long before achieving spaceflight. The few that survived were usually primitive, barely scraping by in caves or underground shelters. But this world was different. Their long-range scans had detected something impossible. Cities, technology, and clear signs of a thriving civilization. The Galactic Federation's scientists were baffled. How could any species not only survive but flourish on a planet where the very air could kill most known life forms? "Atmospheric analysis complete," announced Zelnara, their science officer. Her tentacles danced over the control panels as she processed the data, oxygen levels at 21%. That's poison gas, Commander. How are they breathing poison gas? The ship's medical officer, Dr. Quintef, made a whistling sound that indicated extreme concern. The gravity is also wrong. It's pulling at nearly 10 standard units. That kind of force would crush our bones within hours. Vexthala felt her stomach twist with unease. The creatures they were sent to observe lived in conditions that would kill her entire team in minutes. Yet somehow these beings had built what appeared to be a spacefaring civilization. "Take us to the dark side of their moon," she ordered. "We'll establish a base there and send down observation drones first." As their cloaked ship moved past the Deathworld, Vexthala stared out at the blue and green sphere. It looked almost peaceful from this distance, but she knew appearances could be deceiving. The mission briefing had made it clear. This planet experienced regular catastrophic weather events, massive earthquakes, and was bombarded by deadly radiation from its star. 3 days later, they had gathered enough courage to land. Their biosuits would protect them from the lethal atmosphere, and their armor could handle the crushing gravity for short periods. They chose a landing site near what appeared to be a small settlement, far from the major population centers they had detected. The team set up their observation post in a cluster of tall plants that their scanners identified as some kind of woody vegetation. The local flora was another mystery. How could plants grow so large and abundant on a world that should barely support microbial life? Through their high-powered scopes, they watched the settlement. The beings looked surprisingly similar to many humanoid species they knew, though they seemed larger and more heavily built. What shocked the Zephyrians most was how casually these creatures moved around their deadly environment. "Look at that one," whispered Krikstal, pointing to a figure working in what appeared to be a cultivation area. "It's handling those plants with bare skin contact. Our scanners show those plants contain enough toxins to kill a Rigelian battle beast." Dr. Quintef was taking readings constantly, his medical scanners working overtime. Their biology doesn't make sense. They should be dead from radiation exposure alone, but they seem to thrive in it. And watch how they move in this gravity. They're not struggling at all. Zelnara had been monitoring their energy signatures. "Commander, I think we need to relocate. Some of them keep looking in this direction. It's probably just coincidence, but—" "Contact approaching our position," interrupted Sergeant Blickstar, their security specialist. His voice carried the edge of barely controlled panic. "Single individual moving directly toward us." "How did they detect our position?" Through their scopes, they watched as a lone figure walked steadily toward their hiding place. The being was tall by galactic standards, with weathered skin and graying hair on its head. It moved with the confident stride of a predator that had never known fear. Vexthala felt her hearts beating faster. Their stealth technology was the best in the galaxy. They had spied on dozens of civilizations without ever being detected. How had this primitive Deathworlder spotted them so easily? The figure stopped about 20 meters away and called out in perfectly clear galactic standard, "I know you're in there. Been watching you folks for the past couple days. You must be getting mighty hungry by now." The entire team froze. Not only had the creature detected them, but it spoke their language fluently. How was that possible? "Name's Jake," the being continued, seemingly talking to the empty forest. "I was just fixing to fire up the grill for dinner. Figured you might want to join us. Got plenty of food and I reckon you're probably curious about us anyway. Vexthala's mind raced. First contact protocols were clear, but they had never covered a situation where the observed species made contact first. And the creature, Jake, seemed remarkably calm for someone who had just discovered alien observers. Got some friends coming over too, Jake added. Nothing fancy, just a regular barbecue. But you're welcome to stay hidden if you prefer. Though I gotta warn you, it gets mighty cold out here at night. And there's been talk of bears in the area. Bears. Vexthala quickly accessed their database. Bears were massive predatory creatures native to this world, capable of tearing apart most known materials with their claws. And this being was mentioning them like a minor inconvenience. After several minutes of whispered debate among her team, Vexthala made a decision that went against every instinct she had developed in 20 years of military service. Diplomatic protocols existed for a reason, and refusing a peaceful invitation from a newly contacted species could be seen as an act of aggression. "We accept your invitation," she called out, her voice projector translating her words into the local language. Jake smiled, an expression that showed his sharp white teeth. "Excellent. Come on out then. Dinner's in about an hour." One by one, the Zephyrian Guard emerged from their hiding place, their weapons prominently displayed but not aimed. Jake looked them over with the casual interest of someone examining a new type of flower. "Interesting gear you got there," he said. "Those suits for the atmosphere? We got some oxygen masks in the house if you need them." Dr. Quintef ran a quick scan on Jake while they talked. The results made him step backward in alarm. The creature's bone density was 3 times higher than normal galactic standards. Its muscle fiber composition suggested physical strength that could rival their powered armor. And its brain showed activity patterns they had never seen before. Multiple regions working simultaneously in ways that should have been impossible. "Don't worry about the doc there," Jake said, noticing Quintef's scanner. "He's just trying to figure out how we tick. You folks seem pretty nervous. This is a safe area. Hasn't been a serious predator attack in months." Months. Vexthala realized that what this being considered a safe area would be classified as a death zone by galactic standards. As they walked toward the settlement, Jake chatted casually about local weather patterns, completely unaware that he was describing conditions that would require emergency evacuation protocols on any civilized world. He mentioned temperature variations that would freeze most species solid, wind speeds that could tear apart buildings, and seasonal storms that carried enough electrical energy to power a small city. "Should be a nice evening, though," Jake concluded. "Clear skies, light breeze, temperature dropping to only about 40 degrees. Perfect weather for outdoor cooking." The Zephyrians exchanged horrified glances. 40 degrees was well below the freezing point of water, and this creature was calling it perfect weather for outdoor activities. As they approached Jake's dwelling, Vexthala could see other figures moving around the area. The friends Jake had mentioned were arriving, and each one moved with the same casual confidence that marked them as apex predators. "Hope you folks like meat," Jake said cheerfully. "Got some good steaks from that bull that tried to gore my neighbor last week. Figured we'd grill them up nice and proper." Vexthala's translator took several seconds to process that statement. This being was planning to feed them flesh from a creature that had recently attempted to kill another member of its species, and he spoke about it as if it were a normal food preparation method. She began to understand that they weren't just observing a Deathworld species. They were about to dine with predators who had turned survival into entertainment. Jake's property sprawled across several acres of what he called good grazing land. To the Zephyrian observers, it looked like a carefully maintained death trap. The open spaces were crossed by streams that their scanners identified as containing dissolved minerals, toxic to most known life forms. The vegetation included numerous species that produced airborne irritants, and their motion detectors picked up dozens of small creatures moving through the, undergrowth, any one of which could probably kill an unprotected galactic citizen, but Jake walked through this landscape like he owned it, which apparently he did. "Been in the family for 3 generations, he explained as they approached a large open area behind his dwelling. Grandpa cleared most of the land himself, back when the predator populations were a lot higher. Of course, that was before the state started managing the ecosystem properly." Vexthala tried to imagine what higher predator populations might mean on a world where the current wildlife could already kill most galactic species. Her mind refused to process the concept. The gathering area was dominated by several metal structures that immediately sent their threat assessment systems into overdrive. Open flames danced beneath metal grates, filling the air with smoke and the smell of burning organic matter. The heat signatures were intense enough to trigger their equipment's proximity alarms. "There's the grill," Jake announced proudly, gesturing toward the largest of the fire-based cooking devices. "Built it myself from an old oil drum. Gets hot enough to sear a steak in 30 seconds. Dr. Quinteff's medical scanner was going crazy, detecting temperature levels that would instantly vaporize most organic compounds. Yet Jake approached the device without any protective equipment, casually adjusting metal implements that glowed with heat. Other humans were already present, standing around smaller fire sources with beverages in their hands. They turned to greet the newcomers with expressions of curiosity rather than alarm. Vex Thala counted 12 adults and 3 smaller beings that appeared to be juvenile humans. "Folks, these are our visitors from off-world," Jake announced to the group. "They're here doing some kind of research. Hope you don't mind sharing the barbecue." The response was a chorus of friendly greetings. Not one of the humans seemed concerned about the presence of heavily armed aliens at their social gathering. Several actually approached to examine their equipment with the casual interest of beings who had never learned to fear anything. "That's some fancy armor." Observed a female human whose scanner reading suggested she could bench press a small vehicle. "Military? Reconnaissance," Vexathala replied carefully. "Cool. I was Army myself back in the day. 22nd Airborne. We did high-altitude insertions mostly." Sergeant Blixtar, their military specialist, nearly choked when his translator processed that information. High-altitude insertions on this world would involve jumping from aircraft into an atmosphere that could kill most species, then landing on terrain that was already classified as uninhabitable. "What kind of combat did you see?" he asked, professional curiosity overcoming his fear. The female human, who introduced herself as Sarah, launched into a casual description of warfare on a death world. She spoke of battles fought in temperature extremes that would shut down most military equipment, of soldiers operating for days without sleep in conditions that would be fatal to most galactic species, and of combat operations conducted in weather patterns that resembled natural disasters. "The worst was that winter deployment in the mountains," Sarah continued. 60 below, winds over 100 miles per hour, and we still had to maintain defensive positions. Lost 2 guys to frostbite, but we held the line. Blixtar realized that what this human considered a difficult military operation would be classified as an extinction-level event by most civilizations. Meanwhile, Jake had begun preparing the food. He handled the burning metal implements with bare hands, apparently immune to temperatures that would melt most standard equipment. The meat he placed on the grill came from creatures that looked like they could have served as cavalry mounts for a galactic army. "This beef comes from cattle we raise right here on the ranch," Jake explained, turning thick slabs of protein with a long metal tool. "Free-range grass-fed, hormone-free, though I gotta admit that particular bull was getting a bit aggressive. He charged my neighbor's truck last month and put a dent in the front bumper." Zelnara ran a quick scan on the meat. The protein structure was dense enough to stop small projectiles, and the muscle fiber composition suggested an animal capable of generating tremendous force. Yet these humans had not only killed such a creature but were planning to consume it for pleasure. "How do you hunt such dangerous prey?" she asked. Jake looked confused. "Hunt? We don't hunt cattle. We raise them. They're domesticated livestock." The concept took several seconds to process. These humans had somehow convinced massive, aggressive creatures to live peacefully in their territory. They had turned potential threats into food sources through some kind of advanced biological manipulation. "Of course, we do hunt wild game sometimes," added another human, a male whose thermal signature suggested he was running a constant low-grade fever that would hospitalize most galactic species. "Deer, elk, the occasional bear. Though bear season's pretty short and you need special permits, bear season." They had regulated hunting schedules for creatures that could tear apart armored vehicles. As the evening progressed, the Zephyrians watched in growing horror as the humans engaged in activities that defied every survival instinct known to galactic civilization. They stood within arm's reach of open flames, consuming liquids that their scanners classified as mild toxins, and handling implements that could easily serve as weapons. The children were perhaps the most terrifying of all. They ran around the gathering with the boundless energy of youth, occasionally approaching the fire sources to request s'mores, a food preparation that involved deliberately setting organic matter on fire and then consuming it while it was still smoking. "Want to try one?" asked a juvenile human, offering Vexithala a stick with a charred white substance attached to the end. Vexithala's biosuit automatically identified the substance as containing enough sugar to trigger diabetic shock in most species, combined with gelatin derived from animal bones and wrapped in processed plant matter. The fact that it had been deliberately exposed to open flame made it a potential carcinogen as well. "Thank you, but our dietary requirements are different," she managed. The child shrugged and consumed the toxic mixture with obvious pleasure. Dr. Quintef had been taking readings on all the humans present, and his findings were becoming more disturbing by the minute. Every single one of them showed signs of exposure to radiation levels that should have been fatal. Their blood chemistry included compounds that would be classified as controlled substances on most worlds, and their bone density suggested they had evolved in gravity wells that would crush most known life forms, yet they moved through their environment with the casual confidence of beings who had never known a threat they couldn't handle. As the sun began to set, Jake announced that the food was ready. The Zephyrians watched in fascination and horror as the humans gathered around the fire to collect their portions. The meat that emerged from the cooking process was charred black on the outside and red with what appeared to be blood on the inside. "Perfect medium rare," Jake declared, examining a piece of the partially cooked protein. "Nothing beats beef cooked over an open flame." The humans consumed their meals with obvious enjoyment, occasionally making appreciative sounds as they chewed the tough, barely cooked meat. They washed it down with fermented beverages that would probably be classified as chemical weapons by the Galactic Health Organization. Vexithala realized that they weren't just observing a meal. They were witnessing a demonstration of how apex predators celebrated their dominance over their environment, and the most terrifying part was how normal it all seemed to them. The true scope of human casual lethality became clear when Jake started explaining the menu in detail. What the Zephyrians had initially mistaken for a simple meal turned out to be a carefully orchestrated display of this species' complete dominance over their hostile environment. "The beef, like I mentioned, is from our own cattle," Jake said, slicing through the charred meat with a blade that their scanners identified as sharp enough to cut through most starship hull materials. "But Sarah brought some of that salmon her daughter caught last weekend." Sarah nodded proudly. "Emma pulled a 15-pounder out of Cold Creek. Fought for nearly an hour before she could reel it in." Crickstall quickly accessed their geological database. Cold Creek was misnamed. It was actually a body of water with high mineral content that would be mildly acidic by galactic standards. The fish that survived in such conditions would have to be incredibly resilient. "How old is Emma?" Dr. Quintef asked, his medical curiosity overcoming his growing alarm. "Just turned 12, Sarah replied. "Been fishing since she was 6, though. Takes after her grandmother that way." The Zephyrians exchanged glances. A juvenile member of this species had successfully captured a large aquatic predator from a hostile water source, and this was considered normal childhood development. Jake continued his culinary tour. "Tom over there brought his famous chili. Uses peppers he grows in his own garden. Fair warning, though, it's got a bit of kick to it." Tom, a human whose thermal readings suggested he was perpetually overheating, grinned and held up a small bowl filled with what appeared to be a red paste. "Made it with habaneros and ghost peppers this year. Added some Carolina Reapers for good measure." Zelnara ran a quick chemical analysis on the substance. The capsaicin levels were high enough to be classified as a non-lethal chemical weapon. Most galactic species would require immediate medical attention after exposure to such concentrations. "My record is 3 bowls, Tom added proudly, though I was sweating pretty good by the end. The humans around him laughed appreciatively, as if deliberately consuming chemical irritants was a form of entertainment rather than a form of torture. "And Lisa made her potato salad," Jake continued. "Uses potatoes from her own garden, plus some wild herbs she forages from the forest." Vexthala's botanical scanner immediately identified several of the herbs as containing compounds that would be strictly controlled on most civilized worlds. One was a natural stimulant powerful enough to cause heart palpitations in most species. Another was technically a mild neurotoxin. How do you know which plants are safe to consume? She asked. Lisa, a human female whose muscle tone suggested she regularly engaged in combat with large predators, smiled. Experience mostly. My grandmother taught me when I was little. You learn to recognize the dangerous ones pretty quick. The casual way she spoke about dangerous plants suggested that the edible ones were merely less likely to cause immediate death. As the meal progressed, the humans shared stories that revealed the true scope of their species' casual relationship with mortality. They spoke of recreational activities that would be classified as extreme survival scenarios by galactic standards. Went rock climbing last month, mentioned a human named Dave, whose bone density readings suggested he could survive impacts that would shatter most beings. Did that new route up Devil's Tower, took me 6 hours. But the view from the top was incredible. Devil's Tower, according to their geological database, was a near-vertical rock formation several hundred meters high. Climbing it without mechanical assistance would require strength, endurance, and risk tolerance that bordered on the impossible. I prefer water sports myself, added another human. Did some whitewater rafting on the Snake River last summer. Class 5 rapids. Lost 2 paddles and nearly flipped the raft, but what a rush. Class 5 rapids were water conditions that would destroy most watercraft and kill most passengers. These humans sought them out for entertainment. The children, meanwhile, were engaged in their own activities that would require emergency intervention on most worlds. They chased each other around the fire with burning sticks, played with creatures that their scanners identified as venomous insects, and handled sharp implements with the casual confidence of trained soldiers. Kids are so resilient, observed one of the adult humans, watching a small child who had fallen and scraped his knee on rough concrete. The child had simply brushed off the injury and continued playing, despite bleeding freely. Dr. Quintef noted that the child's healing response was already beginning. The blood was clotting at a rate that suggested accelerated cellular repair, and the child showed no signs of distress despite an injury that would require medical attention for most galactic species. As darkness fell, Jake brought out additional lighting in the form of more open flames. The humans gathered closer to the heat sources, apparently immune to the smoke and sparks that would trigger evacuation protocols on any civilized world. Perfect night for stargazing, Jake observed, looking up at the clear sky. Should be able to see the Milky Way once the moon sets. The Zephyrians realized that these humans regularly exposed themselves to cosmic radiation for recreational purposes. On most worlds, nighttime sky observation was conducted from within protected structures, with filtered viewing equipment. I brought my telescope, added Tom. We can get a good look at Jupiter and Saturn if you're interested. They had built optical devices to deliberately observe celestial objects that emitted dangerous levels of radiation, and they did this as a hobby. The evening's most revealing moment came when one of the children approached Vexithala with a small container. Want to see my pet? The child asked excitedly. Inside the container was a creature that made every threat detector on their equipment activate simultaneously. It was small, dark, and covered in what appeared to be natural weapons. According to their database, it was an arachnid whose venom could cause paralysis and death in most known species. That's a black widow spider, the child explained proudly. I found her in our garage. She's really cool. Watch how she moves. The child opened the container with no protective equipment, allowing the deadly creature to crawl across their bare hand. The spider moved calmly, apparently as comfortable with the human as the human was with it. Spiders are beneficial predators, the child continued, displaying knowledge that would be considered graduate-level xenobiology on most worlds. They eat all the bugs that would otherwise damage our crops. This one probably catches dozens of flies and mosquitoes every day. Mosquitoes, their database informed them, were small flying creatures that fed on human blood and transmitted diseases that would be classified as biological warfare. Agents, the humans had somehow achieved a symbiotic relationship with creatures that most species would consider weapons of mass destruction. As the Zephyrians watched this casual display of controlled lethality, they began to understand that they weren't observing a primitive species struggling to survive on a hostile world. They were witnessing apex predators who had turned their entire environment into a sustainable ecosystem designed to support their continued dominance. These humans didn't just survive on their death world, they had made everything else on it serve their purposes. The conversation took an even more disturbing turn when the humans began sharing what they considered normal recreational activities. Jake, refilling his beverage from a container that their scanners identified as containing enough ethanol to sterilize medical equipment, started describing his recent vacation. Took the family camping up in Yellowstone last month, he said, settling back in a chair positioned dangerously close to the open fire. Beautiful country up there. Saw some wolves, a few elk, and one grizzly bear that wandered right through our campsite. Sergeant Blickstar's threat assessment system nearly overloaded. Grizzly bears were massive predators weighing several hundred kilograms, with claws capable of tearing through armored vehicles. The fact that one had entered their temporary shelter should have triggered an immediate evacuation. What did you do when the bear appeared? Vexathala asked, genuinely curious about human emergency protocols. Jake shrugged, took some pictures, made sure the cooler was properly secured. Bears have a great sense of smell, so you don't want to leave food lying around. But this one was just passing through, didn't seem interested in us, the casual way he described. Photographing a creature that could kill him suggested either complete ignorance of the danger or confidence in his ability to handle the situation. Given everything else they had observed, Vexthala suspected it was the latter. Course camping's not for everyone, added Sarah. My brother prefers more active vacations. He's into mountain climbing. Just got back from attempting Everest. Mount Everest, according to their geological database, was the highest peak on this planet. The atmospheric conditions at its summit would be fatal to most life forms. And the climbing route passed through multiple death zones where even humans required artificial life support. Did he reach the summit? Dr. Quintef asked. Not this time. Had to turn back at about 28,000 feet when the weather turned bad. But he's planning another attempt next year. The humans spoke about deliberately seeking out life-threatening conditions as if it were a hobby. They traveled to the most hostile environments on their planet not for research or military purposes, but for personal satisfaction. I'm more of a water person myself, contributed Lisa. Love scuba diving. Best dive I ever did was in a cenote in Mexico, about 130 feet down in an underwater cave system. Vexathala's mind struggled to process this information. Underwater cave diving was an activity that combined drowning, crushing pressure, disorientation, and the possibility of becoming lost in an environment with no emergency rescue options. It was essentially a deliberate simulation of multiple death scenarios simultaneously. The visibility was incredible, Lisa continued. You could see these amazing rock formations that had been carved by water over thousands of years. Of course, you have to be careful about nitrogen narcosis at that depth, and we had to make decompression stops on the way back up. She spoke casually about medical conditions that would require immediate emergency treatment for most species, as if they were minor inconveniences to be planned around. Tom decided to contribute his own recreational horror story. I'm into extreme skiing myself. Love those black diamond runs in Colorado. There's one called The Wall that's basically a controlled fall down a near vertical cliff face. Black diamond runs, their database informed them, were classified as expert-level skiing terrain with gradients steep enough to cause fatal falls. The fact that humans deliberately hurled themselves down such slopes on primitive transportation devices suggested either mass insanity or complete mastery of their physical environment. Had a pretty good wipeout last season, Tom added cheerfully. Caught an edge about halfway down and cartwheeled for maybe 50 yards. Ended up with a separated shoulder and a concussion. But the paramedics had me patched up and back on the slopes the same day. He described sustaining injuries that would hospitalize most beings for weeks, then immediately returning to the activity that had caused them. The children, not to be outdone by the adults, began sharing their own adventures. The 12-year-old who had caught the fish described her recent experience at something called summer camp. We did rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and survival training, Emma explained excitedly. The survival part was really cool. They dropped us in the forest with just basic supplies, and we had to find our own food and shelter for 3 days. Deliberate abandonment of juveniles in hostile wilderness was apparently considered educational rather than child endangerment. What kind of food did you find? Zelnara asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her growing horror. Berries, some edible roots, and I caught a couple of fish with a trap I made from branches. Emma replied proudly. My counselor showed us how to identify which plants were safe to eat and which ones would make you sick. The child had been taught to distinguish between various levels of toxicity in wild vegetation as part of normal education. The shelter building was fun too, another child added. We learned how to construct weatherproof lean-tos using just natural materials. Mine stayed dry even when it rained. These juveniles were being trained in advanced survival techniques that would challenge military specialists from most civilizations. As the evening progressed, the Zephyrians began to notice other disturbing details about human society. The adults carried small communication devices that they claimed could summon emergency assistance from anywhere on the planet. But they seemed to view this capability as a backup option, rather than a primary safety measure. I always carry my satellite phone when I'm hiking in remote areas, explained Dave, though I've only had to use it once, when my buddy broke his leg on a climbing trip. The rescue helicopter had us out of there in about 2 hours. They had developed planet-wide emergency response systems capable of extracting injured personnel from any location, but they used this technology primarily to enable them to engage in even more dangerous activities. The paramedics around here are pretty good, added Jake. They've had lots of practice with hiking accidents, climbing injuries, and the occasional animal attack. Professional, efficient, and they don't ask too many questions about how you managed to get yourself into trouble, animal. Attacks were apparently common enough to require specialized medical protocols. Dr. Quintef had been quietly analyzing the humans' biological responses throughout the evening. His findings suggested that these beings existed in a constant state of controlled stress that would be fatal to most species. Their heart rates, blood pressure, and neurochemical balance all indicated bodies prepared for immediate violent action, yet they seemed completely relaxed. I think our guests are getting a little overwhelmed, observed Sarah, noticing the Zephyrians' increasingly agitated behavior. Maybe we should tone down the adventure stories. The humans had correctly identified their visitors' emotional state and were offering to modify their behavior accordingly. This suggested a level of social intelligence that was completely at odds with their apparent disregard for personal safety. Vexathala realized that these beings weren't reckless or primitive. They were so supremely adapted to their hostile environment that activities which would kill most species were genuinely recreational for them. They had evolved beyond the need to fear their own planet. The true revelation came when Jake offered to show them his food preparation and storage area. What the humans called a kitchen turned out to be a collection of devices that would be classified as industrial equipment on most worlds. This is where the real cooking happens, Jake said proudly, leading them into an enclosed space filled with mechanical apparatus. Got all the modern conveniences here. The first device he showed them was a metal box that generated temperatures hot enough to melt certain alloys. Jake called it an oven and demonstrated its operation by placing raw vegetable matter inside and exposing it to heat levels that would trigger fire suppression systems on any civilized space station. Use this mostly for roasting and baking, he explained. Can get up to about 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Perfect for cooking a turkey or making bread. 500 degrees Fahrenheit was hot enough to cause instant third-degree burns to most galactic species. These humans use such temperatures for routine food preparation. Adjacent to the heating device was another apparatus that Jake identified as a freezer. He opened it to reveal an interior environment that maintained temperatures well below the freezing point of water. Keeps food fresh for months, he said, removing a package of what appeared to be animal protein. This is some venison from the deer I shot during hunting season last fall. Hunting season. They had regulated periods during which humans were encouraged to track and kill large herbivores for food, and they stored the meat in conditions that would freeze most known life forms solid. Venison's pretty lean, Jake continued, examining the frozen protein. Has to be, since deer spend most of their time running from predators. Makes for good eating, though, especially if you marinate it properly. The humans had analyzed the muscle composition of their prey species and developed cooking techniques to optimize the consumption of different protein types. Sarah opened another storage unit that maintained temperatures just above freezing. This is the regular refrigerator, she explained. We keep dairy products, vegetables, and anything else that needs to stay cool. Inside, Vexathala could see containers of liquid that their scanners identified as containing active bacterial cultures. On most worlds, consuming bacteria would require immediate medical intervention. The milk comes from our own cows, Sarah added, retrieving a container of the bacterial liquid. And these eggs are from our chickens. Nothing beats fresh eggs for breakfast. Eggs. They were consuming the reproductive cells of other species as a regular dietary component. Tom decided to demonstrate another food preparation technique. He retrieved a large, sharp implement and began cutting vegetables on a wooden surface that showed clear evidence of previous use in dismembering organic matter. The key to good cooking is knife skills, he said, wielding the blade with the expertise of a trained assassin. A good chef's knife can handle just about any cutting task in the kitchen. The implement he was using could easily serve as a weapon capable of causing fatal injuries. Yet he handled it with casual precision while engaged in routine food preparation. Dr. Quintef was scanning everything frantically, trying to understand how these beings could safely operate in an environment filled with devices that would be classified as hazardous materials on most worlds. His reading suggested that the humans had somehow developed immunity to most forms of thermal injury, chemical poisoning, and bacterial infection. "Want to see something really impressive?" asked Lisa, moving to a device that immediately triggered every safety sensor in their equipment. "This is my pressure cooker. Can reduce cooking times by about 70%. The device contained a sealed chamber capable of generating internal pressures that would rupture most containers. It was essentially a controlled explosive used for food preparation. "Just put in the ingredients, seal it up, and let the pressure do the work," Lisa explained, demonstrating the loading procedure. "Perfect for tough cuts of meat that need long cooking times." She was casually handling a device that could cause catastrophic decompression injuries if it malfunctioned. Emma, the 12-year-old, decided to show off her own culinary skills. She retrieved a package of what appeared to be processed grain matter and began adding liquid to it. "I'm making cookies," she announced. "Mom taught me the recipe last year. You mix flour, sugar, eggs, and butter, then bake them at 350 degrees for about 12 minutes. A juvenile human was operating thermal equipment capable of causing severe injuries, and this was considered normal childhood education." As the demonstration continued, the Zephyrians began to understand that human food preparation was essentially a continuous exercise in controlled application of lethal forces. They used extreme temperatures, dangerous chemicals, sharp implements, and pressure vessels as routine cooking tools. And they had developed these techniques not for industrial purposes, but for daily sustenance. "Of course, not everyone cooks like this," Jake said, noticing their visitors' increasingly alarmed expressions. "Some folks prefer simpler methods. My neighbor just throws everything on the grill outside and calls it good." Simpler methods, apparently, involved open flame cooking with minimal safety equipment. "And there are plenty of restaurants, if you don't want to cook," added Sarah. "Everything from fast food to fine dining. We've got places that specialize in cuisines from all over the world." They had developed commercial food preparation facilities that exposed multiple humans to industrial cooking hazards as a profession. Tom pulled out a small device that he claimed could locate and heat food from anywhere in the kitchen. "This is a microwave," he explained. "Uses electromagnetic radiation to heat food from the inside out. Pretty convenient for reheating leftovers." They were using directed electromagnetic energy as a routine cooking method. The final demonstration came when Jake showed them his spice collection. He opened a cabinet filled with containers of various powdered substances, each one triggering different warning indicators on their chemical scanners. "This is my hot sauce collection," he said proudly. "Got about 30 different varieties here, ranging from mild to you'll regret this tomorrow. This one here is made with Trinidad scorpion peppers. It's rated at about 2 million Scoville units. 2 million Scoville units represented capsaicin concentrations that would be classified as chemical weapons by most galactic authorities. Who would consume such a substance?" Dr. Quintef asked in horrified fascination. Jake grinned. "Anyone who wants to prove they can handle the heat. It's sort of a challenge thing. Plus, if you can build up your tolerance, the flavor is actually pretty good underneath all that fire." They deliberately consumed chemical irritants to prove their physical resilience, and had developed taste preferences that required tolerance to compounds that would injure most species. As they returned to the outdoor gathering, Fexthala realized that human food preparation represented their species' complete domination over chemistry, biology, and physics. They had turned the basic act of nutrition into a demonstration of their mastery over forces that would destroy most known life forms. And they did it 3 times a day, every day as a matter of routine survival. These beings didn't just live on a death world. They had industrialized death and turned it into cuisine. The Zephyrian Guard filed their report the next morning. It contained a single recommendation: immediate diplomatic contact with humanity, combined with a strict do not provoke protocol and a request for formal alliance negotiations. No species that could turn daily survival into entertainment should ever be considered an enemy. Jake's invitation to return for next week's chili cook-off was politely accepted. The Galactic Federation needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with, and the humans seemed genuinely friendly despite their casual lethality. Besides, Fexthala was curious about what kind of chemical weapons they would disguise as competitive cooking.